G'day new starters, welcome once again to the journey that is my thesis, and thank you very much for being interested enough to check in once again. Have you ever found yourself wondering, why am I here? What's my life all about? That idea has actually been a very significant question for the journey of humanity from the beginning of history, at least as far back as Aristotle in 350 BC, where he talked about the good life. And the good life was achieving a state of compliance with who we are really intended to be. He didn't have much time for the idea that life was about happiness, if happiness was defined by that hedonistic pursuit of experiencing pleasure or keeping pain at a distance. Rather, he understood that the good life, well-being, was established when we achieved the ends to which we were born. And if we simply chose to live a life of virtue, and the higher the virtue, the more consistent it would be with who we are intended to be, and therefore we would experience well-being and even happiness. You know, that's not a thoroughly bad construct. Certainly, I would suggest, as many do, that the nature of God within us calls us, or at least has designed us to live out lives that are consistent with love and honor and worthiness, self-respect, that comes from doing that which is right and good. And to live that way does indeed provide a sense of fulfillment and worth, because that is in fact the way that God did design us. But the starting point is not simply that which is innately within, as much as it is that state exists because of who God is. In the 60s, the psychological endeavor began to take a shift from trying to be primarily about fixing people and what was wrong with them, to understanding what were the psychological components for establishing emotional and psychological health. A couple of men by the name of Richard Ryan and Edward Deci developed a theory called self-determination theory, and they started looking into these principles back in the early 70s. And they decided that what was most reflective of the research, the things that were persistently true in the lives of those people that were reporting contentment, happiness, well-being, a good life, were the ideas surrounding what they call competency, autonomy, and relatedness. And by competency, they meant the capacity to live out life in a way that was consistent with who we really are. The competency is not so much about having the capacity to do a job, but doing a job that is consistent with who we really are. Very Aristotelian construct. Then they also reasoned that autonomy, that the idea that what we are doing comes from within, is a very important thing. So in other words, if I want somebody to do something, rather than just saying to them, you will do this or else, if I can connect with who they see themselves really as and communicate to that place, and that person then can choose out of that place to do that which I have asked them, then they will be much more highly motivated to do that task. And that's not inconsistent with an idea of loving someone and valuing them. And the final thing that they saw that as absolutely essential to well-being was what they call relatedness, being in relationships where one was able to love and be loved and considered a valuable part of a community. So you can see that each of those constructs has to do with the idea of worth. And in terms of my thesis, this idea of finding worth plays a central role. The issue is, however, that for Ryan and Deci, the idea is that though, and for Aristotle actually, that the idea is that those things are within us in and of themselves, and that society either A, puts up barriers to getting there, or B, encourages us to get there. So society acts positively or negatively upon that pursuit. And those observations are actually pretty good, pretty right. But it's clear that there is something more at stake here. And that is certainly, as I would see it, that in our human being, in our human state, the most essential part is relationship with God. That when God created us, He created us to be in relationship, and that which dictates to us the highest ideal for our lives comes from the fact that we are reflective of the nature of God, that the image of God is stamped upon our life, that the ideal of love is stamped upon us because we reflect God's creative work. And that each of those ingredients to psychological health are true to the extent that they reflect the process of re-engagement with God's endeavour in our life. I'm actually quite excited about those constructs, and to be able to think about the endeavour that I'm undertaking here in those more broad-reaching human questions. That's actually pretty important to my thesis process. So thanks for dropping in again this week, and allow me to encourage you through the week that is ahead to look at the things that you are doing in terms of the deepest desire to reach for that which God has called you to. Or perhaps they might be a representation of our desire to deflect the things that we perceive as blocking that goal. So until next week, have a good one.